How dare you speak to me like that? I demand to see your supervisor immediately!
The terminal had the familiar rhythm of travel rolling luggage. Distant announcements, impatient sighs, but something about this moment felt different. A black man stood at the check-in counter, composed and professional, his uniform pressed. His posture confident without being showy. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't arguing. He simply waited as the agent reviewed his documents. That calm shattered when a voice behind him broke through the air, sharp and mocking. The passenger laughed, loud enough for others to hear, and accused the man of pretending to be a pilot. At first it sounded like a bad joke. Then it didn't. The accusation carried weight heavy with assumption, soaked in prejudice. The man at the counter didn't respond. He didn't explain himself. He didn't defend his credentials. Instead, he stood there, silent, letting the words reveal more about the speaker than about him. Around them, strangers slowed their steps. Some stared, some looked away. The check-in agent froze, unsure how to react. This wasn't just an argument, it was a public challenge to dignity. Unfolding in front of dozens of witnesses who didn't yet realize they were about to watch consequences. Catch up with arrogance, the passenger didn't stop. Emboldened by the lack of immediate pushback, he leaned closer, pointing at the man's badge. Questioning its authenticity, demanding that real staff be called. His tone wasn't curious. It was accusing, certain, dismissive. He spoke, as though he had already decided who this man was and what he could never be. The pilot remained still, breathing evenly, eyes focused ahead. Years of training had taught him something most people never learn. Not every challenge deserves a reaction. Still, the tension was undeniable. The agent glanced toward security. A few travelers shifted uncomfortably, whispering. One woman quietly shook her head. Another man raised his phone. The passenger mistook the silence for validation. He demanded a supervisor, his voice rising, insisting that the airline was being careless. Meanwhile, the pilot's calm became its own statement. He didn't shrink, he didn't apologize. Dignified, unmoved and unmoved. What no one noticed yet was a man standing a few steps back, listening carefully, observing everything. He wasn't wearing a uniform. He wasn't announcing himself. But his presence carried quiet authority, and he was about to change everything. Man from the crowd stepped forward slowly, not with anger, not with urgency, but with deliberate calm. He positioned himself close enough to hear clearly, close enough to be seen. He asked the passenger to repeat what he had just said. The request wasn't confrontational, it was precise. The passenger, confident and smug, repeated the accusation. Louder, reinforcing every word, every assumption. He gestured toward the pilot, scoffing at the idea that someone like him could hold such a role. The crowd grew still. The agent stopped typing. The pilot finally turned his head slightly. Acknowledging the presence of the newcomer, the man nodded, then asked another question, quieter but sharper. On what basis was this accusation being made? The passenger stumbled, offering vague excuses, appearance, suspicion, just common sense. That answer landed like a confession. The man took a breath and finally introduced himself, calmly stating his name and position. He was the CEO of the airline. The words didn't echo loudly, but they didn't need to. The silence that followed was absolute. In that instant, the balance of power shifted completely. And the reality the passenger had tried to deny was about to become undeniable. The CEO turned toward the pilot with unmistakable respect, addressing him by title and name, confirming his credentials for everyone to hear. Explained that the man being accused was not only a licensed pilot, but one of the airline's most experienced captains, trusted to train others and represent the company at the highest level. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The passenger's confidence drained from his face, replaced by confusion, then fear. The CEO turned back to him, his tone firm but controlled. He explained that the airline had a zero-tolerance policy toward discrimination, harassment, and public humiliation of staff. This wasn't about embarrassment, it was about values. The passenger tried to interrupt, to laugh it off, to claim it was a misunderstanding. The CEO raised a hand, stopping him without. Raising his voice, he explained that intent didn't matter when impact was clear. The damage had already been done. Security was called, not aggressively, but decisively. The crowd watched as the consequences unfolded in real time. This wasn't a dramatic outburst. It was accountability delivered with precision, witnessed by everyone who had doubted how this would end. Asterisk, as security approached, the passenger's tone shifted completely. He apologized, stumbling over his words, insisting he didn't mean it that way. He asked for another chance, reminding anyone who would listen that he had flights booked, meetings scheduled, plans depending on this journey. The CEO listened, expression unchanged. He explained that respect was not conditional and professionalism was not optional. The ban was immediate and permanent. The passenger would not be flying with the airline again. His information would be flagged, his access revoked. The words landed heavily. A quiet gasp moved through the terminal. Some people nodded, others clapped softly, then louder. The pilot stood quietly as the attention turned toward him, not triumphant, not emotional, just steady. CO thanked him publicly for his restraint and professionalism, acknowledging the strength it takes to remain composed under attack. In that moment, the story stopped being about punishment and became about recognition. The crowd wasn't watching a downfall. Anymore, they were witnessing dignity being affirmed, loudly and unmistakably. Security escorted the passenger away, his protests fading into the distance. The terminal slowly returned to motion, but the atmosphere had changed. Strangers exchanged looks of understanding. A few people approached the pilot quietly, offering words of support. The check-in agent apologized, visibly relieved. The CEO remained for a moment longer, addressing nearby staff, reinforcing the company's commitment to fairness and respect. He made it clear this wasn't an isolated response, it was policy in action. The pilot finally spoke, briefly and calmly thanking those who stood up and reminding everyone that professionalism doesn't always look loud. His voice carried authority earned through years of experience, not demanded through volume. The crowd listened, phones lowered. The moment felt complete. What had begun as humiliation had ended as affirmation. And while flights would continue and announcements would resume, the people who witnessed this wouldn't forget it easily. They had seen what leadership looks like when it shows up quietly and acts decisively. Later, as the pilot prepared to move on, the incident was already spreading, shared through messages, retold in fragments, reshaped into lessons. But the core remained the same. Assumptions had been challenged. Power had been corrected. The CEO's decision wasn't fueled by anger, but by clarity. He understood something important. Allowing disrespect to pass unchallenged only invites more of it. By acting publicly, he sent a message that extended far beyond one terminal or one flight. The pilot, it wasn't about validation, he had long known who he was. But moments like these matter because they define the environment others must work in. They set boundaries. They remind people that skill has no race, and authority doesn't need permission from ignorance. The world doesn't always offer justice this visibly, this cleanly. But when it does, it leaves a mark in the end. The lesson wasn't just about racism being punished, it was about dignity being protected. One man tried to diminish another based on appearance, assuming power without knowledge. Another man, armed with real authority, chose to defend values instead of convenience. And the pilot, at the center of it all, demonstrated a quiet strength that spoke louder than any argument ever could. That day, someone lost a flight, lost access, lost entitlement, but something far more important was gained. A public reminder that respect is the minimum requirement, not a favor. As travelers moved on and flights departed, the story stayed behind, living in the minds of those who witnessed it. A moment where ignorance met accountability. A moment where leadership showed its face. And a moment that proved in front of everyone that professionalism and integrity will always outlast prejudice. As the terminal slowly returned to its usual rhythm, the moment lingered in a way that no boarding announcement ever could. People didn't just walk away with a story, they walked away with a reminder that dignity doesn't need to be loud to be powerful, and respect doesn't depend on who's watching. One man arrived that day expecting a routine journey and instead became a living example of quiet strength under pressure. Another arrived believing entitlement could shield him from consequences and left, understanding that character always matters more than confidence. The decision made in front of everyone wasn't about humiliation or revenge. It was about drawing a clear line and refusing to let it blur. Leadership was shown not through anger, but through calm certainty, proving that real authority protects, not intimidates. And as the pilot continued on his path, head held high, the message traveled farther than any flight that day ever could. Skill has no color, professionalism needs no validation, and prejudice collapses the moment it's forced. To face the truth,